Welcome to Faith Talks Wood Podcast. I'm Will from Flatwood Acres.
I'm Tom from Mountain Valley Maker.
And we're a podcast that talks about everything from Jesus to joinery and a little bit of everything in between. So we're recording this. It's Monday, January 26, 2026. And it's kind of been the snowmageddon across the country. Now, Tom, you live in Western Colorado. I live in northwestern Pennsylvania. I'm used to this snow. This is what we always get this. But I've got friends back in Tennessee, and I know people all over the country that are just like not used to this snow. It's been kind of funny. So how's the weather been out in Colorado?
Well, we got like 2 to 3 inches here on the western slope, and then it kind of blew over. The mountains got more. But I tell you what's worse is I have a few friends down in Texas, and then my mom lives in South Carolina. My brother lives in North Carolina, and they got like 2 inches of ice. Now, Give me 4 foot of fresh, fluffy powder, and I'll take it any day. I'll shovel my driveway and go drive in it. But give me a 1/4 inch of ice, and I am sitting my butt at home because years ago, I got out the Air Force, and I went to work at a motorcycle dealership. We sold Yamaha, Kawasaki, Sea-Doo, and the owner of the company, there's a winter storm forecasted, and we all came into work, and dude, we sat there, and by the time, once they finally told us we're going to close for the day, our parking lot was on a slight slant. You could literally walk out there and slide from one end of the parking lot down to the other. And I drove, back then I had a 4-wheel drive Toyota pickup truck. And buddy, the road to my house had a downhill slant to the left. And I still remember sliding down that. I mean, I drove like 5 miles an hour the whole way home. But it was just solid sleet that we got. The roads iced over. I got home safely without anybody hitting me, and I was so thankful. And so very thankful. We got snow here, and they got a little sleet on top of it. But, man, there's some parts of the country that are just a sheet of ice. So I'm glad I don't live there.
Yeah, I got, I bet, well, it was up. I'm 6'2", and it was up to my knee.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So it's about 16 or so inches of snow we got here. And the problem is, so I think it's a good idea, and then I regret it, is I won't plow until it's all done. Until like most of the snow is done. Yeah, but the problem is when you get that much snow, it's not as easy to move around as is. I mean, I've got a big tractor, and I get the back blade, but the back blade, it doesn't want to move. What ends up happening is, as soon as I have a horseshoe driveway, and as soon as I start to go around the corner, I've got that back blade cocked at a 45. The tractor just turns because it can't pull that snow because of how, it's icy and stuff like that. But yeah, I spent a good hour and a half out there today plowing, and I probably could have been out there another hour just kind of cleaning things up and trying to get it, whatever. But and then it snowed another 2 inches afterwards. I'm like, really? It's just like seems to be my luck. But yeah, we got quite a bit of snow. It's the cold weather here. I think it's supposed to get down to -1 tonight. They've already canceled school tomorrow. So the snow won't cancel school around here as much as the cold does.
Yeah.
Because you got kids that waiting for bus, outside and whatnot, and kids in the city that walk to school and stuff. And so, yeah, so they've already canceled school for tomorrow. They canceled school today. So Eli will be home 2 days it'll be 4 days in a row with Saturday, Sunday, today and tomorrow. So I don't know who's going to go crazy first, him or my wife, but or his sister. His sister might go crazy. Why isn't he at school? He should be at school.
Oh, that's funny.
So
yeah, we used to celebrate snow days in South Carolina when I was growing up, man. It didn't happen that often like you guys get up north. So when we got it, and you could get a 1/4 inch of snow in Carolinas and they will shut school down. But when we get, I do remember getting 6, 8 inches, growing up, and we'd have 2, 3, 4 days out of school and get to make snowmen and all. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it.
I mean, up here, I remember, you know, from the time I can remember, like kindergarten through high school, I mean, we might have a snow day a year, and it's normally because of the cold. The snow doesn't stop us. We've got a whole fleet. There's guys that make more money in the wintertime plowing snow. These guys will make a couple $100,000 a year
Yeah.
out there for, 48 hours straight, doing nothing but plowing. And so we have the infrastructure for it.
Yeah.
It's more if it gets icy, which that doesn't happen as much in Tennessee. I remember everybody talk. We moved to Tennessee and like, oh yeah, they're calling for snow and ice. And my wife and I are laughing until I slid across the road. I'm like, oh, so they do get ice. I see. That makes sense.
Yeah. That's one thing I'll
So
say about Colorado. We have the infrastructure too. And while 95% of the Colorado government, I think, is crap, the Colorado Department of Transportation is awesome, dude. Like, I swear, I don't care how much snow or ice we get, within hours.
they're out there.
Oh, they start prepping before, but man,
Oh
they
yeah.
have the roads cleared, and you go in where you want to in no time flat. Man, they're awesome. They do an amazing job.
Yeah, we call them here, we call them PennDOT, Pennsylvania Department of
Yeah,
Transportation,
ours is
and,
CoDOT.
ODOT,
Yeah,
yeah,
CoDOT.
and so yep, CoDOT and PennDOT, and it was 10 was it 10 dot in Tennessee, I think that we called them. But yeah, it was, a lot of snow and a lot of cold, but grateful to have a warm house, and I got my 3D printer in, and I've printed more stuff, more random crap. But it's up there right now. Hold on one second. I'm currently in the process, and I can't print while we're recording because it's right behind it's right up there. But it is a garage for Hot Wheels for Eli.
Oh, that's cool.
So I've got to print the doors and the roof. I'm going to print those in black, but it's got like texture, like, metal siding and everything.
That's
It's
amazing.
even got the rails on the inside for the garage doors.
That's funny, man.
So yeah, I've been printing stuff like crazy. It's been fun, but well, before we get into our guests, I just want to say thanks to the patron supporters. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/Faith Talks Wood. We appreciate all you guys over there. So our guest, as you guys can see from the title of the podcast, is Shane Murray. Now I want to tell you a little bit about Shane Murray and how I know him and why I asked him to be on the podcast. So we moved to Tennessee in 2018. I told the story. I'll tell it quickly. I had called churches before we moved to Tennessee, and the only church that called me back, because I put in for the pastor, I wanted to know theology and doctrine to make sure we're going somewhere solid, was this guy named Corey Trimble. And him and I talked for 2 hours. 3 months later, after moving down there, my wife and I show up at a next class, and he remembers my name. He's known for that. He remembers people's names. Well, so we get plugged into this church, and that fall, we moved here in February of 2018. That fall, there was a men's retreat or men's summit, we called them. It was just like a Saturday night thing or Friday night thing. And part of the thing was there were going to be opportunities to get plugged into small groups. And it's something that I've been thinking about and been, I need to get plugged in with some guys. And so I went to this, and Shane, he probably didn't know this. I went to this men's summit alone, but I had been in contact with a guy named Jameson. Jameson's wife and my wife served together in the children's ministry, Echo. and found out that we grew up close to each other within like an hour and a half of each other, and then we were both drummers. And so ended up getting his number. We met up at the men's summit. He's like, "Hey, I'm gonna start this group with this guy named David." Well, we did breakout sessions that day. My breakout session was with David, and I didn't know it. And then later on, when I met the David Jameson was talking about, it was the same David.
Hmm.
And it was the group that they were going to break off because there's this huge group of men doing this study weekly called Jesus Frees Us. And this group, this weekly men's group had grown so much that they broke off. They needed to break off into smaller groups. And the Friday night group that I've talked about on here is a break off Jesus Frees Us men's group. And that is started and was founded by Shane Murray, who we have as our guest. And so Shane had reached out to me. He's looking to go full time with this ministry to help guys that, you know, the reason I am who I am today and why I'm here, that Friday night group is a big part of it. And so that's kind of the intro I wanted to give. But Shane, welcome to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I didn't think you didn't know about that story about how I met Jameson through a whim. And then it was the funniest thing at that men's summit. I don't remember what that summit was called. This is 2018. We had these breakout groups where there are these leaders and you talk about certain topics. And there was this breakout group and David was leading it, I think. And there was this dad and his son who just like poured out their broken relationship to the whole group. And it was awkward. It was like this whole like Maury Povich session. And then later when I met up with Jameson, he's like, "Yeah, this guy David is going to be, you know, starting this group and him and I are going to do it." And then he walks me over afterwards and it was like, "Hey, you were leading the group that I was in earlier." And so, yeah, so that's kind of the story there. But man, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, what do you do for living right now, and kind of roll into kind of your testimony.
Yeah, so funny story about that night. I didn't know that story that you just
because
shared.
then we went and rode go-karts till like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. And so Corey asked me to get up on that stage and share and ask guys to get plugged into group that night, and just asked me to do that a couple of days before that happened. And I was completely unprepared for that.
Right.
And I'd never got up on stage at that point in front of anywhere near that many people and talk. So I remember like going blank a couple of times when I was up there, like, what was I talking about again? So that's funny.
I remember that. That's funny.
Yeah. But yeah, so what I do where I'm from, so I live currently in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, right on the outskirts of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I am a home inspector by trade. So if you buy a house and you need to get it inspected to know what you're getting into, I'm the guy who goes in and looks at all the things.
And he's phenomenal at it. He inspected the house that we bought.
Yeah. So I do that currently. I've been doing that for 8 years. I have a construction background, just kind of growing up. My dad was just very handy. So from the age of, I think it was 13, he would put me on summer jobs at different job sites, construction sites, doing different things growing up just to learn all the different types of construction. So, I knew construction things, and I helped him with remodels and building stuff my whole life. So I knew kind of ins and outs of that. That's how I got into doing home inspections later in life. It was just kind of a good fit. But as far as like fine woodworking, you were actually the one who got me more into that. And then after you moved away, there's a guy in my group now who does woodworking as well. Named Mike Smith, and
I know Mike. Yeah.
So he's helped me with some things too and figuring things out. But Yeah, my dad was not a fine woodworker. He was more of a like frame it up, build it, and I took that and started dabbling in more fine stuff. But I'm definitely still a amateur when it comes to that. But it's fun. So
Yeah. So tell us about your testimony. How did Shane Murray get to where he is today? And tell us about yourself.
yeah, so I grew up in Alabama, had a normal childhood, middle class family. My mom and dad stayed together until my dad passed away a few years back. And, growing up, I got into a lot of things at a very young age, got exposed to a lot of things at a very young age. Pornography, drugs, alcohol, crime, all that stuff entered into my life at the age of 9 years old. 9 years old was the first time I saw my first pornography magazine at a sleepover. Started taking alcohol out of my parents' cabinet and drinking it. Started stealing cigarettes out of my dad's carton. Started smoking weed and different things. Just all that kind of started all at once, sneaking out, vandalizing, all those things. And, through the years, they just escalated. So fast forward to 11 years old, then I'm getting involved in chat rooms and different things. And the sexual addiction just goes deeper and deeper. And, I moved at 11 years old up to Tennessee. And so from 0 to 11, my mom would take us to different churches. We kind of bounced from church to church. We never had a church home per se, but my dad was not a Christian growing up. He would not go to church with us. So my mom did the best she could. And we would try churches out for a little while, stay for a little bit. Then we'd stop going for a long time. Then we'd try a different one, stay there for a little while. And that was kind of the routine. But once we moved to Tennessee, we stopped entirely. And then, fast forward again, when I turned 17 years old, by that time, I was in with a very bad crowd of people hanging around the worst people. And that was progressive. And I was one of those people, but I got into a lot more crime side of my life. And then I got arrested at 17 years old for stealing a bunch of stuff from my school, a bunch of electronics, and got arrested, got put in juvie, and went to my court date. And they told me that I could be facing up to 15 years tried as an adult. And so that was when my prayer life kind of started. Those desperate prayers, God, get me out of this and I'll do whatever kind of thing. But my specific request to God at that time was, God, if you'll get me out of this somehow, then I'll never steal anything again. I didn't promise my life away. And I attribute that to I did have a fear of God growing up, and I knew that I needed to be able to hold up my end of the deal if God did come through. I didn't want to promise something that I wasn't willing to actually do. And so then I went to my sentencing court date about a month or so later. And I remember the judge calls me up to the stand, and then she's calling for my arresting officer to come forward. And I'm looking around and nobody's coming forward. And she ends up telling me, well, your arresting officer didn't come here today to try his case against you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut you a break, and I'm going to sponge this off your record. You get to walk out of here as if you didn't do anything. Don't let me see you back in this courtroom. And, for me at 17 years old, first time like really praying this desperate prayer, that was a huge God moment. I was like, wow, God, you really came through. And I wish that could have been my turnaround moment and give my life to Christ, but it wasn't. It was, however, one of those stepping stones that you look back over your life and you're like, that's definitely one of them that got me to that point of surrender. So after that, I had to change schools. I was separated from everything that I knew, everybody that I knew, and it seemed to a 17-year-old Shane, like the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. I was in a new school, didn't know anybody. I was grounded. I couldn't drive my car, had to ride the bus to school. For the rest of my junior year and all of my senior year, I was grounded, couldn't go anywhere, and could have zero contact with those people that I used to hang out with. And, you know, hindsight's 2020. Looking back, that's one of the best things that ever happened to me, because, you know, they say good company or bad company corrupts good character. And I was surrounded by a lot of bad company. And looking back, some of those guys that I hung out with are now in prison. A couple of them for murder. One of them got murdered, and then different other things that they've been locked up for. And I just look back and I'm like, that could have been me, but the grace of God, you know. So God snatched me out of that and put me somewhere else. And so, yeah, I graduate high school and I go down to Alabama, back down to Alabama to go to a year tech school, really just to party. I was under my parents' roof for that year and a half, wasn't allowed to do anything. And I was just ready to get out and just have fun again, you know? So I moved down to Alabama with a couple of roommates, and drugs got more hardcore. Alcohol got more into a necessity, and the sexual things just increased as well. And, you know, I moved back and got plugged in with a couple guys that I used to hang out with, not the guys that were that I was surrounded by when I got arrested, thankfully. But I just got more into the party scene. And I remember at 19 years old, I'm going into the bars after work every night, and alcohol is a huge problem by then. And I'm shutting the bars down till 3 o'clock every night. And it's just this circle, just this endless circle of unfulfillment, you know. Over time, it took a few years to really see that, but I was going to these biker bars. I was surrounded by a lot of older people who were living this lifestyle, and a lot of people that were like my parents' age, older. And I just remember one day feeling like I'm looking around, I'm seeing my future, and it didn't sit well with me. So my answer to that was, I'm going to go get plugged into church. I'm going to go to a church by myself. And so I did. So I went to Life Point in Smyrna, did that for not very long. And then I met my wife, my now wife, and I met her at a wedding. We were friends of friends. She was in the wedding. I just attended and started talking to her. She was pretty freshly out of a divorce. She had a 3-year-old son named Eli. And I started going with her and her family to their church at World Outreach. And I was going there, and that was all good for the first little bit. And then eventually, not long into that, Eli would be going to his dad's every other weekend. And so we would play church. On the weekends he was home. And then the weekends he went to his dad's house, we were living in sin and going to the bars, going to the clubs, and doing all the things. And I remember it took a while. This was 3 years, me and her, doing this, going to church one weekend, going to the clubs and the bars the other weekend. I remember over the course of this, hearing all these convicting messages from the pastor, and then going out and living the opposite way. And at 23 years old is really when kind of God smacked me in the face. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and saying, Shane, you're the biggest hypocrite that I know. And I've called myself a Christian my entire life. You know, I got baptized at 9 because I did believe in God, but I never committed to following Christ. So 23 years old, my answer for that of being a hypocrite and it not sitting well with me was, I'm going to read my Bible cover to cover and see if I really believe this, or if it's just something that was fed to me over the years. And that was when God radically changed my life. So over the course of that year, reading the Bible, it was like the words were just leaping off the page. It was just speaking to me in amazing ways. And I started seeing answers to prayer. I started seeing just all these crazy things happening in my life. And God literally turned my life upside down. And I had this fire, this hunger to know more, to share about this Jesus and this real relationship that people can have with other people, which was completely odd for me. I was an extreme introvert. So to talk to anybody about anything was really uncomfortable. But as I was reading this Bible, I noticed that this wasn't just for me. It was something I needed to tell others about. I needed to share with other people. They needed this too. And so it became my mission to just share about Jesus with other people. And really through listening to sermons and worship music and going to church and reading my Bible, I had this desire to grow. And I heard a pastor one time say, the Holy Spirit is called the Comforter. Why do you need the Comforter if you're always comfortable? Step outside of your comfort zone and experience the Holy Spirit more. And so that became my mission. So I started fasting on Wednesdays and going to parking lots and handing out tracts and talking to people about Jesus, which was extremely funny if you would have seen it at the beginning. I was looking pretty ridiculous and probably sounded ridiculous. Then I started going to a prayer group at my church every morning before work and forcing myself to pray in front of all these people that were older that knew how to pray. I didn't know how to pray. And just, whatever would stretch me and grow me in a godly direction. I was picking up homeless guys on the side of the road and taking them to lunch and just talking about Jesus to them and praying with them, and just whatever was the scariest thing that came to my mind that I thought would honor God. I felt like that's probably what God's asking me to do right now. And so that's what I did. And God was just radically changing my life. And so fast forward, I'm currently at this stage, I'm still dating Haley. We're not married yet. We're about to get married and we're engaged. And I am working at this company that I ended up, I was working there for about 9 years total. No, 7 years total. Sorry. 7 years total. But the last 3 years is the period that I was saved. And so they saw the change. And most of the people that worked there were not believers. And so I started sharing Jesus with them pretty routinely. And my work schedule was getting worse and worse. So last 3 years, I was working 100+ hour weeks, and I would leave when it was night and my kids and my wife were asleep. And then I'd get back home when it was night. My kids and my wife were asleep. And it was just not a good scenario for home life. And so I started praying. And I started asking God, you've got to find me something else. I need more time for my family. I need more time for you. And at this point, I've seen God show up in some miraculous ways already. And I just had this faith that he was going to come through. And I got a phone call like the next week from a different company doing the same sort of thing, but a much smaller scale. And I never put a resume out. I wasn't on LinkedIn or anything, but I got a phone call and they said that they had heard about me and they thought I'd make a good addition to their team. So I went out and I interviewed, and I put all my convictions on the table. I didn't have to have this job. So I told the owner of the company, like, this is not going to be my number one. My family, God are my number one. You will come behind them, but while I'm here, I'll work my butt off for you. But I'm not working a bunch of weekends. I'm not working a lot of overtime. I'm leaving on Wednesday nights, going to my small group. And I just put it all out there on the table. And they said, great, when can you start? And I ended up sharing Jesus with this owner of this company. And we talked for about an hour and a half about God. And she was a church attender, but not really a follower. And And this was a huge thing for her, just this conversation. And so I started going there to work, and God was showing up in amazing ways. Saw a lot of people start going to church, a lot of people get off of drugs and alcohol addictions, and just praying with my team before work every day. And just God was moving. But my main boss, the guy directly over me, he was a Mormon. And I didn't know much about Mormonism at that time. And he called me a brother in Christ. And I remember right after I started there, I asked the owner of the company if we could host a National Day of Prayer, because it was National Day of Prayer like the week after I started. And I was used to going to my church, but now I was too far away to do that on lunch. So I said, can we do a National Day of Prayer? Can I lead that and get a bunch of people gathered? And they said, you can ask, you just can't require anybody to come. So I did. And I asked this guy who I didn't know was a Mormon. He said he was a Christian. I asked him to pray over one of the things, one of the topics, and he prayed in the these and thous, and I've never heard that before. And so that kind of caught me off guard. And later, I had this whiteboard up in my department, and we would put different scriptures on it each week. Everybody that worked there had to go through my department to get to their department. So everybody would see it. Well, one week he asked if he could put a scripture up there. So he did. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, that's not in the Bible. I'm like, where's that from? And he said, the Book of Mormon. I was like, oh, okay. So then I started researching, and we started getting into these heated debates eventually. And he started making my life hell. Coming to work, and it was a long drive. I was dreading coming into work. And so about a year and a half or so into working there, I started praying again, God, you got to find me something else. I can't dread coming to work every day. And the next week I get another phone call. Still no resume or anything. This one made a little more sense. One of the girls that worked for me at the previous job, she now worked at this new company. It was a big company in Nashville, and they called me in and interviewed me. And this time I did not take my convictions into the interview. I was still on fire for Jesus at this point. But during the interview, the owner of the company ended up telling me that I was overqualified for what they were looking for, but he wanted to create a position for me as a director over all the operations. And the salary and the bonuses and the perks, everything were a lot more than I was used to. So I saw this type of success, and I started trying to take things into my own hands, pushing Jesus out of the driver's seat, and I was trying to take the wheel. And it wasn't long before I hit a wall. So work started consuming my time again. And my daughter was born. Eli, my son, he was playing football now. Life was busy, and the Bible started getting pushed on the back burner. Church was becoming less consistent. And this was 6 years into my walk. And that whole 6 years, I was just on fire for Jesus. No drugs, no alcohol, no pornography. Everything just kind of went away. And then during that decline and allowing the worries of this world and the worries of life and just the deceitfulness of wealth, it choked out the word, and it made it unfruitful in my life, like the Bible talks about. And porn came back in to my life at that time. And it came back in a way that I couldn't overcome it. And my fire for Jesus just completely went out. I felt like I didn't have his presence anymore. I felt like my prayers were falling on deaf ears. I don't really know how to explain it other than I felt lost again. And so I felt lost, felt like I lost my salvation. I'm struggling with pornography really bad. Struggling with alcohol again, started drinking, started having more arguments at home. So home life was rocky. And then not long after that, I lost my job. So again, this is 6 years into my walk. And this is some perfect storm of chaos in my life. And I got plugged into a men's group. at my church who, you know, I've been in a lot of men's groups. I've been in a lot of groups. I've led groups up to this point, couples groups with my wife. And they had all had this thing in common, and it's called surface level. So that was the norm to me. That was what I was used to. Up to this point, I've never seen a man of God that I felt like I respected to a point like I would follow that guy. I'll follow him through hell and back, you know. I never saw any man like that. My dad was not a spiritual leader growing up. However, during that portion of those 6 years, my dad did get saved. And that was one of the answered prayers on my list. Because, you know, one of the first books I read, which the Bible is the first book I ever read completely at 23 years old. And then after that was Not a Fan by Kyle Idleman. And that one really rocked my world and showed me what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus, not just a fan, an enthusiastic admirer. And I remember I desperately wanted my dad to read the Bible. I desperately wanted him to read that book, Not a Fan, because both of those had changed my life so much. But I knew he wouldn't read a book, but he would watch a movie. And Not a Fan had a movie. And so I gave him the movie, and a couple months later, I go to my prayer meeting at that church in the morning, and he comes in, and this isn't at the 6-year point. This is like a couple years into following Jesus. I just kind of went and rewind. But he came in to that prayer group, met me there, and I was taken back. I didn't know why he was there. I didn't know he watched the movie. And he just said, you know, I just want to check it out. You've talked a lot about it. So we sit down, and the guy who leads the group looks at my dad right off the bat and says, sir, is there anything you want to talk about or pray about? And my dad was a very strong, silent type. And so I'm just sitting back like I have no clue what's about to come out of his mouth. And what happened next, my dad broke down and started crying. He was shaking. He was stuttering his words. I've never seen him like this. And through his broken English of stuttering and crying, he said, I don't want to just be a fan of Jesus anymore. I want to be a fully committed follower of Jesus, and I want what my son has. And so that was a huge moment in my walk. And my dad gave his life to Christ there that morning, and he was completely changed. He would read his Bible every day. He started serving in the church. He started serving my mom. And this was a guy who I never saw him do anything around the house unless it was outside work. And he started doing all the laundry, the cooking, the cleaning, just serving my mom, and with joy, with a smile on his face. And so this different man. But anyway, so fast forward when I was in that 6-year slump, where I felt like I lost everything, that surface level group that I was in asked me to go to a men's retreat in Georgia. And again, I was in the middle of jobs. I didn't have a job. And so I had no excuse. They paid my way, and I went. And I had never been to a men's retreat before. I didn't know what to expect. But what I found were the most vulnerable, most courageous, strongest men that I've ever met in my life at that point. And I'd never seen men take the mask off and get real up to that point. And now I'm sitting in a room full of about 150 men sharing the deepest parts of themselves with each other, and just sharing what they're really going through, you know, and their brokenness. And they had this love for each other and this love for Jesus that just absolutely rocked my world. And I went into that retreat not knowing what to expect, but I knew that my fire was out, and I knew I desperately wanted it to get relit. And that was my hope, and that was what I was seeking for. And so for the first time in my life, I saw that modeled for me, that vulnerability and that just true confession and repentance, and just bringing all of yourself to the light. And it was the first time that I felt safe enough to do it myself. So that weekend, I confessed everything to some guys at my table. Actually, we had a time where we could share our testimony with the guys at the table, and I went through everything, and I left out everything to do with porn and sexual addiction and stuff. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It was like I wanted to share, but it was like my lips were zipped closed, and I just couldn't share those parts. And I knew that that was my one chance. I just knew that, like, this is my opportunity. These are guys I'd never have to see again. They've done it. I've seen it modeled. Like, this is my chance. And I couldn't do it. And that night, I found a guy, an older man, who I heard his story earlier that day, and it very much resembled mine. And so I tracked him down, and I said, you have to come with me and sit down. You have to hear my real story. I have to share this with somebody. And so I did. And I shared everything with him. And then I ended up sharing it with the rest of my group. And man, that was the most freeing thing that I had ever done. And I went to one of the guys that night, and I said, I want to get baptized down there in that cold water. It was October in Georgia, and it was cold. And they said, well, we never do baptisms here. We've never done that. I was like, well, I want to get baptized. We're doing it tonight. So we did. We went down to the lake, and I got baptized, and I came out of that water just feeling like my fire was lit back up. My chains were gone. I was just on top of the world. And when I left that retreat, I remember looking around the table at these 7 or 8 guys that I just spent 48 hours with. And I was like, I feel like I know these guys more than I know anybody else in my life. I feel like I'm closer to these guys than anybody I've ever known. And it's because, intimacy, into me see, it's like we share the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves with each other. And so we were intimately bonded at that point. And when I came back, I was like, I need guys in my life like that to do life with, to keep the mask off, chase after Jesus together, and just, I need that all the time. So when I came back, I didn't necessarily plan to start a men's group, but I knew that I wanted to have a couple guys to do that with. And so that was the birth of Jesus Freezes Men's Group, is in October 2016, when I came back from that men's retreat. I left the group I was in, and I just started meeting with a few people, keeping the mask off and doing life together and chasing after Jesus together. So.
What a story.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, I have to know, at what point in your walk did you start attending the Experience? So for those a lot of you guys know that listen to the podcast, I was part, and Shane is part of the Experience Community Church in Murfreesboro. And there's a lot of things about that church that I've never experienced anywhere else. And I'm just curious, so what part of your walk did you start going to the Experience?
So that's kind of funny. It was not long after I started the Jesus Freezes group. When I was still going to World Outreach at the time that I started that group. And when I went to the leaders that actually took me to the Solely Business retreat, and I asked them, I was like, why don't we do what we saw there? Just model that in group form, what we experienced at this retreat. And they were like, I don't know if the church would be okay with that. And, looking back, I'm like, confessing your sins to one another, praying for one another, like chasing after Jesus together, like being real. Like, it's funny, but that was the answer I got. So I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna step away from this, and I'm just going to do what I saw there with a couple of guys. And it was maybe 2-3 months into that started with 3 guys, that I'm looking around the room, and there's about 30 guys sitting there, and we're like, okay, we need to split. Like, we can't have this many people in one group. And so that was our first time multiplying the Jesus Freezes group, was at World Outreach. And not long after that, I started going to the Experience, and I had no desire to leave, honestly. I was plugged in at World Outreach. I was serving. That's where I got saved at. Like, I was on fire for the Lord again. And so I was growing. My wife grew up going there. She had no desire to leave. But her nephew graduated high school, got into a lot of bad things, and one of his old teachers took him under his wing and started taking him to the Experience Church. And so I asked my wife, I was like, well, we've heard a lot of good things about it. Let's go check it out with him and just see what it's all about. And so we went into that church to try it out, just to check it out with her nephew, Thomas. And when we were there, it was right after a worship night, which I'd never heard of. I didn't know what that was. But their worship after a worship night was just Kyle.
And a piano.
Yeah, the lead guy. He was up there with the piano and had one singer next to him. It was just very intimate. And he kind of gave a sermonette on worship before he started doing worship. And I loved it. I was like, this is awesome. And then Corey comes out, and he's just this real guy, humble and just it was awesome. I loved it. Honestly, my wife probably loved it even more than me. So my wife never went back to World Outreach after that. I went back and forth for a couple months because I was serving there. So I went back and forth and attended both until I made the official switch. And even then, when I was attending Experience, I was still leading that group on Wednesday nights at World Outreach. And I told them that. I told them that I no longer attended there and knew that was an issue with me leading a group there. And I asked them if I could continue to do it until I found somewhere else, and they let me do that. But then Experience came and said, hey, we have a room for you guys at the Experience. And so the half that split off with me came with me to the Experience. The other half stayed over there at World Outreach. And that's when we made the move. So it was less than a year probably after starting Jesus Frees Us. So we've been there for about 9 years or so at the Experience. So
yeah, and to just echo that, I mean, when my wife and I went to the Experience to test it out, and now of course Corey was the only one that ever returned my call. I called World Outreach. I called like the 4 big churches in Murfreesboro, and nobody called me back. And so that was a big tick, but then we never went anywhere else. We stayed. The worship was authentic. Corey's an expository teacher and really good at it. And we're just like, what is this thing that you call the Bible? We grew up in church and we didn't even know, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, me or my wife had never experienced expository teaching until the Experience. That was a new concept to us. Every church that I had ever been to, and she had only been to World Outreach, but every church that I'd ever been to was topical teaching. Right. So to come somewhere and then they're just going through the Bible book by book, chapter by chapter.
And Pastor Allen at World Outreach is a phenomenal preacher.
Yeah,
Homeboy can lay it down, but there's just something about the expository. But
is that Alan Jackson Ministries over there?
Yeah, so my wife honestly didn't start really growing in her faith until we made the move to Experience. I think part of that is just the normalcy of what she grew up in and needing something new. So she left what she grew up in since she was a little kid and went to a different church and sat under a different type of teaching, expository teaching, and that really sparked a lot of growth in her walk. So, it was a great move for both of us.
Yeah, it's honestly, I miss it. But and that's awesome. So we've had a lot of guys with testimonies come on the podcast. We've had ladies come on. Every guy, I'd say, Tom, would you say 95% of the guys struggle with porn?
Oh yeah.
That have told their testimony?
I would say that 90% struggle with it, and the other 10% don't admit it.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's an embarrassing thing. I never wanted anybody to know, but I was just like Shane. I started 9-10 years old, something like that, looking at my dad's Playboys that he had hidden on the top shelf of the and how I first discovered them was like in the that we had a closet in my parents' bathroom where, excuse me, they kept towels and washcloths and toilet paper and, all the typical stuff you'd have in a bathroom. And, when I was a kid, I washed the dishes, I did the laundry, I did all stuff. And, go up, putting away the laundry, I noticed the magazines up there and curiosity wanted to see what it was. And then my dad noticed that I didn't put them back in order. But I treat it like kind of that there's a comedian, one of the blue collar comedy guys. I can't remember which one of them. But he had a joke in his stand up that said, I seen one set of titties. I pretty much want to see them all. And while that's a joke and funny, it's a reality. It's like once you saw at such a young age, you just wanted to see more, or at least I did, and more and more and more. And then, but you never wanted that was, and that's why we always talk about James 5:16, and you talked about confessing it at that men's retreat.
Yeah.
Nobody goes out and looks at a porn magazine in the middle of public. You don't go to a strip club for lunch. It's all in the dark. It's all when nobody else can see. And until you bring that stuff in the light and confess it, and that's why, I cannot, a men's group like you have, or men's retreat, every man needs to be involved in a place that's, like you said, not surface level. And I'm so thankful I got a group of guys I meet with every Thursday morning. Back in North Carolina, I had a group of guys. And sooner you can get that crap in the light, the sooner you can get away from it. So,
sin is never satisfied. And the longer you leave it in the dark, the more it grows. And so I was a man going up to that point of going to that retreat. I had a lot of secrets, and they were just destroying me, honestly. And they will. Secrets will absolutely destroy you. And to bring things to the light, it's the scariest thing that you will ever do. I remember when I was at that retreat, I remember asking some guys, do I have to tell my wife? And the first guy's like, yeah, you need to tell her. And I didn't like that answer, so I kept asking. And finally found the guy that said, no, you don't have to tell her. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going with that one. And that obviously didn't last longer. I wouldn't be on here talking about it. But I remember coming back and God was just drilling me. He's like, you got to tell her. And I remember praying and telling God, like, this is going to ruin everything. And if I'm a teller, you're going to have to make the door so wide I can drive an 18-wheeler through it, because any other way, I'm just not going to do it. And so I was praying. I was like, God, prepare her heart. Give me the biggest open door that you can give me. And one night after my men's group, and she knew that the men's group was very vulnerable, and we talked about stuff. And I remember we're laying in bed, and it was after I got home from group, and she's asking me questions, and she said, I know that y'all talk about everything. And she said, you talk about your struggles. She said, but I honestly don't know what you struggle with. She's like, what are your struggles? And I was like, okay, this has got to be the big door, right? But I was so scared. And so I shared with her some old addictions. Like, I think I talked to her about cigarettes and alcohol and drugs and stuff that I struggled with in the past. And she goes, okay. And she gets up and walks to the bathroom, and she stops at the door and turns around, and she says, is that it? I was like, okay, God, okay, this is that door I was asking for. I have to tell her. So I told her everything then. And it's funny. You can't hide much from your wife. she said,
No.
I knew that was it. And it was funny. I was like, how did you know? And her response was, she said, I mainly knew because you have such a heart on that specific thing for other men that it had to be something personal to you. And also when she was pregnant, she said she found some on my phone or something. And she said, at first I just thought it was because I was pregnant or whatever. And she said, but when you started this group and I just saw that you had such a passion for helping men with that specific thing, I knew that was something very personal to you. So,
hey, Shane, you'll be proud of the Friday night group. I'd been going for several years. I mean, we started 2018, and through COVID and everything, and I finally opened up to the guys. I mean, and I was partially leading that group. Like, I'm the guy that has a degree in advanced biblical studies, and I'm the guy that's there, and they're always referencing like, well, what is this passage and what is it? And I finally opened up, and it was a weight, but it wasn't all the way off yet. And Jameson says to me, "You've got to talk to Hannah." I'm like, yeah, right. I'm like, oh no. Well, we had we have a smart TV, and it was tied to my YouTube account. And she had went on to find some kids show on YouTube for the kids for Eli at the time. We hadn't had Olivia yet, and she saw videos that I had watched in my history that it wasn't porn, but it was, very much borderline. And she basically sat me down and she's like, tell me right now. And dude, I'd never cried so hard in my life. And I never felt so much weight off my shoulders in my life. I mean, oh my goodness, right? And so I think there's something about that. And we moved back from Tennessee to Pennsylvania, and there were two things that were going to keep us in Tennessee: the Experience Community Church and my Friday night group. Like, if there was anything that was going to keep us there, it was those two things. And it just happened that, we found a place not far from her parents with 25 acres. We found, I got a really good job, and there's a lot of things that was like, coming back, and we're glad that we're back here. But I still miss that Friday night group. Now I've got a group of guys every Wednesday morning we meet. It's not quite as vulnerable. I mean, it's not surface level, but it's not meant to be. Basically, we're 4 leaders of the church, and we talk about stuff that's going on in the church and that kind of thing. But and so I'm still striving for that. And my goal is to get to a point where I have the time to start a JFU group up here.
Yeah.
So tell us about Jesus Frees Us, and about now you wrote a book, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, I have that book. It is.
Oh,
It's out in the living room of the bookshelf.
Yeah.
So tell us about Jesus Frees Us, and about your plan coming up here in the next few months, and kind of what you're looking to do in your life and in the ministry.
Yeah. So, I started that group, Jesus Frees Us, back in 2016, and now we're in 2026. So 10-year anniversary will be in October of doing that. And over the course of time, man, like I said, I started it with just a few guys in a room with the intention of taking the mask off and chasing after Jesus together, loving one another, and just challenging each other and encouraging one another. And that's what we did. And it's just grown because, lo and behold, other men need that safe space like I did, And so, I told you that a couple months in, we got 30 guys in the room, and we're like, okay, what do? We need to multiply. Well, that's continued to happen. So now we've multiplied 17 times over the course of those 10 years. And and there's been just so much fruit that I've seen God working in men's lives. And I can share a couple of short testimonies of that. David Allen, that led that Friday night group, is one of the big ones. His story's actually in the book. But I remember when he called me, I was still at World Outreach. So this was right at the beginning of starting this. And he didn't call me, messaged me on Facebook Messenger. And he just asked me a simple question of what kind of Bible do you read? And I responded, I said, what do you mean? Like translation? And he said, I don't know. And so I was like, okay, there's something more to this. So I started prying and asking questions, and found out that, his best friend had OD'd on heroin and died. And he was going through a really rough spot, and he was examining his own life and realizing like he didn't have much purpose. And from the outsider looking in, like he had everything going for him. He had a great job. He had a wife that he'd been with since like middle school. He had kids, the house, the cars, the toys, like everything going on. He had the American dream, but on the inside, he was falling apart. And so he started confessing to me about porn. He started confessing to me about alcohol and drug addiction, some hardcore drug addiction that he had struggled with since he was a teen, and he was in his late 30s at this time. And he's doing all this through Messenger with me. And so I ended up telling him, I was like, well, you got to come to my men's group. I'll pick you up. And so he said, okay. Well, then Wednesday rolls around, and I'm on my way to his house and almost to his house. And he texted me and said, hey man, I can't go tonight. Something came up. And I was like, well, I'm about to be at your house, so you're coming. And so I picked him up and took him to and from group for a couple months. And we just get in these deep conversations. And I remember the first time I took him to group, on the way there, I told him a lot of my story. And he looked at me and he said, man, I can't believe you shared all that with me. I was like, well, buckle up. You're about to hear a lot more when we go into this room. And so we went in, and for whatever reason, he threw up all his junk on his first night, just shared everything. And he wasn't raised in church. He didn't know much about God. And so this was a foreign concept to him. And he's like, I don't know about this Jesus thing. He's like, I see that you believe it. And he's like, I'm hoping there's something to it. And so that's kind of where he started at. And we started, every week he would just pour out, and he'd get beat up. If you ask him, he's like, y'all would just beat me up every week over stuff.
Sounds like David.
Yeah. And he would do everything we told him to do. He was praying, he was reading the Bible, he was going to church, he was doing all these things, coming to group every week. And it took him a year before he surrendered his life to Christ. And I remember during that year, I was like, God, is this guy ever going to come to the faith? Like, because he would text me one week and be like, I read this, and it's like, hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I'm never going to be the same. And then the next week he calls me, he's like, man, I was just praying on the way home. And I'm like, who am I even praying to? Do I even believe this? Like, what am I doing? And so he's very up and down. And it was at the year mark, I remember, he was coming to group, and at his job, he was a director over Hiller Plumbing. And his boss was a Christian, strong Christian man. And he would see David on his lunch break reading his Bible. So he just assumed David was a Christian too. And he passed David in the hall one day, and he said, tell me something about our Jesus. And David looked at him and he's like, man, I don't know. And so his boss took him in his office and tried to lead him to Christ for like 3 hours. And David called me that night pissed. He was like, I'm not going to be another notch in this guy's belt, like just all this stuff. And he's like, I don't know what it is, but I've laid down for people my whole life. And for some reason, this is not going to be one of those things. If I give my life to Christ, like it's going to be real. And so I was talking to him that night, and I was like, I told him the parable of the seeds. And I told him, I feel like there's seed that's sown on rock, right? And it springs up quick with excitement, and then it gets pulled away. And I said, I feel like there's a stone under the surface, man, because it's just not penetrating, or there's scales on your eyes that need to fall off or something. And I was like, I'm going to be praying for you on that. And so the next day, he texted me. He said, "You've been praying that prayer for me?" I was like, "Yeah, why?" He said, "I just read something in Romans that just completely like blew my mind." And he said, "This whole year, I feel like I've been running after God, trying to catch up. I just can't catch up to him." He said, "I read this in Romans. It says, 'Don't you realize it's the goodness of God that leads men to repentance?'" And he said, it was like, man, I'm not running after God. God's running after me. And so then his boss calls him into his office and tries again to lead him to Christ. And he tells David, he looks him in the eyes and he says, "You're not another notch in my belt." And then he shares with him the parable of the seed and said, "I think there's a stone under the surface that needs to be removed." So David's telling me this. He's like, I knew that was God, obviously. And so he gave his life to Christ right there in his boss's office. And yeah, so fast forward, he's been leading group out of his home for like 6 years or something now. But I've seen fruit like that in so many men's lives where God radically gets a hold of their life and it changes them. It changes their wife, their whole family. And like, Tom Smith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he is another one that came to my group. There's so many stories, but I'll just give you a couple. But he came in my group about 6 years ago, and he was struggling with opioid addiction. And he was a very high functioning addict, I would say. He's a realtor, and his business was doing great. Well, his wife and him were going to the experience, but they weren't serving, they weren't plugged in, they were just going. And she went on a mission trip with the church to Uganda, and she was a nurse. And so she goes on this mission trip expecting she's going to be doing medical stuff. And they give her a translator, and she's going into mud huts talking to people about Jesus who've never heard the name of Jesus, and sharing the gospel, and people are getting saved. She saw this woman get healed. Like, all these things are happening. And so she calls Tom back home, and she's telling him all this stuff, and she's just like lit up, all excited about it. And Tom's response to her was, "Well, don't you go becoming some missionary. We have a family at home to feed." And that was how hardened he was. And so she hung up, and then he's at home.
Look at Tom now.
Yeah, he's at home struggling with this, and he's like, "All right, God, I'm not going to be the reason to screw this up for her. She's wanted a close relationship with you for a long time." So he starts trying to overcome this addiction on his own, and he flushes all the pills, and he's sleeping and sweating. And, that lasted for about a day and a half. And then he buckled and went and bought more pills. And so he's going through this cycle of just repeat. And about a few days in, he's in the shower, and he just hits his knees crying. And he's like, "God, you got to take this from me. I can't do it." And God did. And she gets back, and he said, "God's telling me I got to tell her everything. And so he goes to her one morning, and she's on the couch reading her Bible, and he goes to her and gets on his knees, and he just shares everything with her: the opioid, the alcohol, the porn, everything. And she, full of grace, just looks at him, and she's like, "Okay, well, what are you going to do now?" And he said, "Well, I did it. I told God I'm good. Like, I quit, I'm good." And she said, "Well, what about NA or AA?" And he said, "No, I've done those all my life. They don't work for me." And she said, "Okay, well, what about a small group?" And he said, "Yeah, let's join a small group." And she said, No, not us. You need a men's group." And so he messaged me. He looked up on the church app and saw the Jesus Freezes group and sent me an email and said, "Hey, just a guy who loves Jesus but struggles with earthly things, needing some accountability." That's all he said. And I remember that day like distinctively. I was sitting in a coffee shop. Pastor Corey was walking in. I was about to meet with him. I don't even remember about what, but I remember I get this email right as Corey walks in. So I'm like trying to respond really quick. I said, "We meet in the main sanctuary at 7:00. See you then. Send." And he responds back right away and says, "Oh, I have my daughters tonight, maybe next week." And then I just respond back and said, "We have childcare. See you at 7. Send." And so he shows up at 7:00, and he almost left. He walks in, sees this big group of guys, probably expecting a much smaller group, and just turns around and starts walking out. And I was like, Tom? And, so he came in, sat down, and went over the ground rules, and we started group. And man, I remember the week 2 that he was in there, I asked him if he was reading his Bible, and he said, yeah, I'm reading my Bible. And I said, what are you reading? He said, Matthew. And I said, where are you at in Matthew? And he just stops and blank stares at me. He's like, man, I'm not reading my Bible. And so I started walking close with Tom for years. And about a year and a half into that, I remember he called me after showing a house. Like I said, he was a realtor. And he called me all excited. He just shared Jesus with these people showing the house and prayed with them. And he's all pumped up about it. And I remember I said, well, do you think that God put you in real estate just to sell houses? And he said, no. He said, I know I'm supposed to share Jesus wherever I'm at, whatever I'm doing. He said, but my real passion, I think, is helping guys find freedom over drug and alcohol addiction like I did. And I was like, okay. Well, the next day I get a message from one of the drug Christian rehab centers that I go to and speak at. They messaged me and said, hey, do you know anybody looking for a job who has a passion for helping guys with drug and alcohol addiction? We're hiring. And so I just forwarded the message to Tom. Honestly, never in a million years thought he would do it. Because if you looked at his schedule, he played golf and met people for lunch, and like that was his life. And he was doing great. And 2 weeks later, he's full-time with this ministry and hired somebody to take care of his real estate thing and went full-time with that ministry. And then this past year, he said he felt God telling him he wants him to get to these guys before they're husbands and fathers when his life went sideways in high school. And so now he's full-time with FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and over all these people going into these schools and sharing the gospel with kids. And so, like, just seeing God do this work over and over and over in men's lives has been amazing. And it was 2020 when I wrote the book. 2019, I remember my wife had a dream. She woke me up in the middle of the night and she said, hey, babe, I just had a dream. I'll never remember my dreams. She said, I don't know how any of this happened. She said, but you were on a stage and you wrote a book. Yeah, I'm the last person to write a book is what I'm thinking. And she said, well, you wrote a book called Jesus Frees Us. And I was like, okay. She said, you were on stage talking about it. I said, well, what's it about? And she said, I don't know. She said, but you were talking about removing the mask. That's all I remember. And so that week I started writing that book. And it was like every time I sat down, it was just spilling out. And so a few months into that, I had the book ready to publish, and then COVID hit. And I was like, well, I'm not publishing a book right now. Like, this is the worst time to publish a book. So I sat on it for a while. And honestly, I didn't know if COVID was ever going away. So I was like, well, I got to publish it. So I published it right around the time that everybody was being forced to wear a mask. And a lot of the book was about taking the mask off. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, so through writing the book, God's opened a lot of doors for me to start going into places and sharing my story, going to men's events and retreats and sharing my story, giving my book out and going to recovery centers or rehab centers and sharing with them. And over the years, the group, while that's grown and multiplied, there's also been this element of people getting discipled more on a one-on-one level by guys who are going through the group too. And people that go through these rehab centers get out and they start getting plugged into groups or getting discipled by a lot of these guys. And so that's been happening. And over the last few years, we've led some retreats and done some events and all these things. And, it was probably 2 years ago, for whatever reason, it was like God highlighted the brokenness of men to me. And I had seen it. I mean, ministry's messy because it involves people, right? But I'd seen the brokenness these all 10 years of doing this, just coming in. But 2 years ago, it was like it just ramped up exponentially. And I was seeing broken marriage after broken man, just all these things come in. And it just broke my heart, honestly. And I was like, man, we got to do something about this. And I've heard so many times from guys who come into these groups say, you know, if I had something like this years ago, my marriage wouldn't be where it's at right now. And other guys say, man, they're just blown away by the vulnerability in the group, and they've never been in part of anything like this that has challenged them to grow in their faith and to actually like chase after Jesus and read the word. And there's so many stories of guys who had never read their Bible, and they started reading their Bible, coming to this group on their own, just getting encouraged to read their Bible. And it's completely turned their world upside down like it did mine. And so this impact that it's had on all these men a couple of years ago, I felt like, and this needs to happen everywhere. And the brokenness that I'm seeing highlighted here is just an isolated version of what's happening all over the world. And so it was that couple of years ago that I was just like, all right, God, like, what can we do? How can I spread this and expand the impact that it's having currently in Middle Tennessee in a larger way to different churches and homes and coffee shops and everything? And I didn't know the how. I had the why, you know, and your why is really important. And we've talked a lot about that this year, me and my group, of why you do what you do. And your why is huge, right? That's what keeps you going. And I had my why because I have this heart for broken men, and to see them come in to find freedom and purpose in Christ. And that completely changes everything when you truly have it. You're not just checking the box of going to church or going to group or even checking the box of reading your Bible, but you truly are pursuing Christ with this heart of, God, I just want to know you. I just want you to change me, like reveal yourself to me. And so that was my why, just to see God impact more people. But it was just a few handful of months ago when God showed me the how. And so I started a ministry, Jesus Frees Us Ministries. It's a nonprofit ministry now. I filed it. It's going. And my goal is in March to go full time with it. And since I pulled the trigger and since God kind of showed me the how, he showed me this way. And it was actually through FCA and Impact Night that I attended. And I'd been to a lot of these like fundraiser benefit nights for different ministries I'm involved with. And we went to this one, me and my wife did. And at the end, one of the guys was sharing when he was on the board with FCA when they first came to Middle Tennessee, that they were very budget driven and they were always struggling and just arguing about finances. That was always the issue of every board meeting. We don't have enough to do what we want. How can we take what we have and stretch it and do as much as we can? Very budget driven. And that had been how I'd approached ministry. Like, okay, this is the time I have. How can I stretch myself around this and do as much ministry as possible? And he said, FCA really changed when he challenged them and said, let's start asking God what this ministry would be if finances weren't an obstacle, if money was not an issue. And let's be more mission driven. God, what do you want this to be? And show us how to get there, versus budget driven. This is what I have. How can I use it? And so that was the real green light for me of, okay, God, that's not the question I've been asking. I need to ask that question. What do you want this to be? And that's when he started giving me a much bigger vision that I can't do on my own. It's not about me just doing more ministry, but there's so many guys throughout the world that are checking a box, that are in a group that's surface level, that they don't know how to do life. They don't know how to be vulnerable because it's never been modeled to them. And I want to see that kind of impact spread everywhere, through the small groups, to the one-on-one discipleship, to the retreats and events that we do. Just, I want to see more of a global impact. And that's kind of the vision that God gave me for that. And so, yeah, now I'm just 100 miles an hour trying to get to where I'm going full time with this. And yeah, my goal is March. We'll see what God's plan is. Sometimes it's a little different than ours, but that's what he laid on my heart. And so far, since I pulled that trigger, there's been opportunities to expand out past Tennessee to several different states without me even pursuing it yet. So just organically, I've had churches from Florida and Virginia and North Carolina, and now sounds like Pennsylvania, that we can go and help. And I know there's ones here locally that I haven't had the bandwidth to help, that have wanted different input and guidance and help with their discipleship programs and leadership trainings and stuff for the groups that they have going. Because I talked to a lot of pastors, and they are all struggling with the same thing. They're like, we have groups, but we don't feel like they're not as impactful and transformational as what we want. And it feels like it's a lot of checking the box. And I mean, even within our own church, there's that. But honestly, I think Experience Community has more authenticity and vulnerability than most churches. And so I know Middle Tennessee probably does, just being on the Bible Belt. But honestly, that's not always the case. There's a lot of surface level, just because men don't know how to be vulnerable. And I've always said vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And so the leaders have to model that. If they ever want their guys to open up, then they have to be open to. So,
man, that's awesome stuff. So is your book, is that for sale on a website, on Amazon?
Yes, it's on sale on Amazon. It's called Jesus Frees Us by Shane Murray. It's called Jesus Frees Us, the Battle Cry of a Soldier for Christ. So yeah, you can pick it up on Amazon, or if you go to my website for the ministry, there's a buy here button that takes you to Amazon. But the ministry website is JesusFreesUsMinistries.org. So you can check that out too.
Okay.
Yeah, I highly recommend, you guys listening. I know 90% of our listeners are guys. If you guys are looking for something more, if you're looking for something that is beyond surface level, you need to reach out to Shane and his ministries. And actually, funny enough, David Allen is now a board member of your ministry, the guy that couldn't make up his mind. And fun fact about David, and he'll probably listen to this podcast, I'll send it to him. He impressed me because I heard his story. He told me his story, when we started group and stuff. That man absorbed the word of God. And like, he would just spout stuff off like, how do you remember that? And I've never met anybody like him that's just, read and then just remembers it.
Yeah.
And then you talk about Tom, that guy's high energy.
Yeah.
You said high functioning. I said, that sounds about like Tom. That he's just one of those guys that he's like that crazy dog. You just give him something and he's going to go after it. And, man, I love hearing the stories, and the book is full of those stories of men and whatnot. So, man, I'm going to encourage everybody to check out your website. We'll put it in the link in the description of the podcast, and also, this is a pretty big feat. I mean, you have a good job, and you're looking to quit your job and take this full time, and unfortunately, that does mean finances, and that does mean that you've got to get to a certain point and to where you can make that feasible. So guys listening, consider bringing Shane into your church, reaching out to him, getting some resources from him, supporting him, because I'm a living example. And it's on my list, Shane, to do a little reel type video for you for your website, on where I was and who I am today. The Experience Community Church and the Jesus Frees Us Friday night group is why I'm here. And so, yeah, it's good stuff, man.
That's awesome.
So, real quick, I know you haven't had much time out in the shop lately either, have you?
No, not a whole lot. I had I shifted from some of my woodworking to I bought an old truck, and so my time's been consumed in my square body Chevy for a little while. While I still like to tinker on some wood projects here and there, but that's consumed a lot of my time lately until I started this pursuing to go full time with this ministry thing, and that's consumed all of my time, literally. But yeah, I love woodworking. I have a full on shop out there that has all the necessary tools, and it's fun. Just building out my shop was a blast, and that was kind of for me a lot of the learning curves I could tackle during that process too. I mean, you made a lot of things for my shop with your wood burning or wood engraver thing.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You remember that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that has shifted to Mike Smith has made me some, because he has one of those too now.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't have a wood engraver, CNC or anything like that, but I do have just router tables and chop saw and all kinds of hand tools and planer and joiner and table saw and all the things, work table, all that. But the finer type of woodworking thing, the first thing that I ever made that took a lot more detail for me, because like I said, I didn't grow up doing anything fine with wood. It was more rough end stuff. But first thing I ever did was make a shadow box for my dad's flag when he died to give to my mom. So I bought some walnut and made a flag box. So that was a cool, fun project that I did. But yeah.
Good stuff, man. Well, appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And I know that the guys that listen to this podcast, they're going to resonate, and they're going to be like, man, Shane sounds just like me. Because honestly, it's funny how that works. You can ask Tom. We'll post an episode with a guest tells her testimony, and we always get messages from guys that are like, oh my goodness, this guy. Yeah. And that's the reality. There's somebody listening to this that just likes to hear a bunch of goofballs talking, and then they hear a testimony like yours, and they're like, man, I need to reevaluate myself. And so it's good stuff, man.
And that's the thing. Like, before I ever encountered vulnerable men willing to talk about what they were really going through, I felt like I was all alone in my struggles. Like, nobody struggles like I do. And that's what most men think, that their struggles are unique to them. And then they get plugged into a group like Jesus Frees Us and discover, like, I'm not alone,
Right.
I'm not alone in this. So that's
isolation is a tool of the enemy.
Absolutely.
And so when you can get a man isolated, all the things creep in, and it's having that vulnerability and having those guys. And it's funny too, like with the Friday night group that I was a part of, that's still going on. I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
With David, we got to know each other really well. And, I come in, and David or Jameson or Haney, one of those guys, like, Will, what's up with you? What you talking about? There's nothing up with me. No, there's something up with you. Yeah. And it's like, you just start drawing it out of each other. And, good stuff, man. So what's your web, JesusFreesUsMinistries.org, right?
Yes, that's the website. And then, you can find the book on Amazon as well. And it's funny, you said people are going to call in saying, I feel like I'm hearing my story. Can't tell you how many people have told me that after they read the book. So many guys are like, I feel like I'm reading my story and I'm crying all the way through it.
Yeah. Well, and to give everybody kind of a synopsis, your book is a compilation of stories, right? And so any addiction, any sin, anything you could think of in this book, somebody in there, you tell a story about that's dealt with it. And it really is encouraging. The weird part for me when I read it is like I knew a lot of these guys. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that about their story, or like, oh man, and so it's highly recommend picking it up. So anywho, well, it's getting late here. I gotta get up. I actually have training tomorrow for work. I've got to go in for this like manager training they send us to, so it'll be fun. So
very cool. Well, thank you, Shane. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate y'all having me. This was fun.
Absolutely. Well, until next week, I'm Will from Flatwood Acres.
And I'm Tom from Mountain Valley Maker.